Next, we will talk about events on the front, including those taking place on the territory of the Russian Federation, because the war has long since moved there. Russian regions are under drone attack. The authorities of the Moscow region report a drone raid. The capital of the aggressor country was allegedly attacked by more than 30 drones. In Moscow airports, nearly 1,500 flights were cancelled, delayed, or redirected to other airfields. In Veliky Novgorod, the Akron chemical plant, which produces raw materials for explosives, was hit. In the Smolensk region, drones allegedly struck the Dorogobuj thermal power plant. There were also loud incidents in the Belgorod and Voronezh regions. Ivan Timochko, a military expert, is joining the national marathon broadcast. Mr. Timochko, greetings to you. Good morning.
Good health to you. Glad to see you.
Ukrainian drones in the Moscow region, the capital. Now all Russians understand that even there, it's dangerous. In reality, how important is it to strike the capital?
For Russians who generally like to assign symbolic meaning to things, and to Moscow in particular as another example today. And of course, the significant strikes, especially those impactful operations that disrupt the crucial functioning of their vital airfields, are indeed very significant. First and foremost, these are the primary airfields utilized by transport aviation, which effectively connects essentially all regions of Russia and a truly huge number of populated areas and communities across the vast country. There are locations in Russia that, in terms of trade or internal economics, are dependent on and tied exclusively to aviation. The second significant point is that when the war moved onto Russian territory, it didn't just move there, it is now spreading all across Russian territory. And in this case, for example, today, what's notable here is that the Russians are scrambling their military, supporting their aviation, but they're not doing it to fight drones. Rather, they're doing it to move them out of harm's way. This is a record of tonight's escalation, the spread of war across Russian territory. In other words, they weren't sure they'd be able to protect them, so they were forced to move them up. They had to relocate not only transport aircraft, but also military Air Force planes. And this is also significant because it means that it is becoming increasingly difficult for them to cover Russia with air defense systems. The second, or rather the third point, which is no less significant and very important, is that a huge number of defense industry enterprises are actually concentrated around Moscow. This is because, after all, the largest urban infrastructure in Russia is developed precisely in Moscow or the Moscow region. The fact that there is a huge population in Moscow and the Moscow region means there is a large concentration of labor as well as a massive concentration of migrants. This makes it possible, for example, to launch and fully utilize this infrastructure for building military factories. And this is no secret. Russia has launched them. In addition, they have established a significant number of numerous business centers in Moscow and the Moscow region that are actively engaged in highly illicit and unlawful trade, responsible for illicitly smuggling essential materials specifically intended for Russian agriculture. And of course, when they hide their activities, if they are hit and their enterprises are put out of action, we understand that this is quite a serious, let's say, support for the armed forces of Ukraine who are defending themselves on the front line. In addition, Moscow is in the spotlight of both the public and the media. A great deal of attention is focused on Moscow. One way or another, there is even a physical presence of a large number of ambassadors, foreigners, and even agents operating in Russia. This includes the diplomatic corps, and all of them report back to their own countries that the Russian army is unable to defend itself, unable to defend Moscow. And this seriously undermines Putin's narratives about being able to wage a prolonged war without obstacles. It breaks Putin's narrative in which he claimed he wanted to bring journalists to Pokrovsk to show how they are supposedly winning there. Then drones fly right into Moscow itself, and journalists can witness this, as well as foreign delegates, let's say, without Putin's help. This is a serious and weighty argument, but on the other hand, We also understand that this is only a part of the strikes carried out on the military-industrial complex or on facilities that supply the Russian army in Russia, because essentially Russia now, thank you, we can confidently state that the entire vast geography of Russia is now a potential and vulnerable strike zone for our advanced drones, because our sophisticated drones are already effectively covering impressive distances of well over 2,000 kilometers. And the highly successful Powetina operation clearly demonstrated that we are fully capable of conducting significant military operations deep within Russia at a truly strategic and unprecedented depth, extending several thousand kilometers from the actual front line of engagement. And this is also quite a problem for Putin, especially for the image of the security agencies from which he himself emerged, namely the FSB and their foreign intelligence services, and so on. Of course, every such drone serves as a reminder to Russians that the decision to wage war against Ukraine was a grave mistake. But there is still a lot of work to be done.
The European Union is very close to resolving the issue of financing Ukraine using frozen Russian assets. This was reported by the President of the European Council, Antonio Costa. According to him, the EU leaders' summit may continue until a final decision is made on the reparations loan. The meeting, let me remind you, is scheduled for December 18th through 19th. Costa emphasized that, if necessary, negotiations on Russian assets will continue for several days until the EU leaders reach an agreement.
The latest developments highlight the need for urgent action by the EU. At the October meeting of the European Council, we committed to covering Ukraine's urgent financial needs for 2026 to 2027, including its military and defense requirements. At our next meeting, we must decide how to fulfill this commitment. Recent events show that Russia and Belarus have intensified their hybrid campaign in Europe. This reminds us that we need to step up our efforts on all fronts to ensure our defense capability. Antonio Costa, President of the European Council, in a letter of invitation to the leaders of EU member states.
The EU Commissioner for Enlargement has arrived in Ukraine for a 2-day visit. According to the European Commission, Marta, the COS will discuss the country's accession to the EU at an informal meeting of EU ministers. On Thursday, December 11th, in Lviv, the European Commissioner will join the Informal General Affairs Council, where the progress of Ukraine's EU membership negotiations will be discussed. Immediately upon arriving in Ukraine, the COS visited one of the energy infrastructure facilities destroyed by a Russian strike. She assured that Europe will help Ukraine cope with the consequences of the Kremlin's terror.
We have developed a special plan under which Ukraine will be completely energy independent and fully integrated into the European energy system by the end of 2027. And then there will be no more blackmail, no more attacks. And the entire population of Ukraine will have enough electricity. In
the port of Odessa, a vessel from Russia's Shadow Fleet sailing under the flag of one of the African countries has been detained. This was reported by the Security Service of Ukraine. Previously, the ship had illegally transported Ukrainian agricultural products from temporarily occupied Crimea. The Russian-controlled cargo ship was exposed when it arrived at the port of Odessa to pick up a shipment of steel pipes. Its owner is under sanctions imposed by the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. To circumvent the restrictions, the ship regularly changed its name. It was precisely the beneficiaries from third countries, according to the Security Service of Ukraine. At the time of the vessel's detention, the captain and 16 crew members were on board. All of them are citizens of Middle Eastern countries. Ukraine also continues to fight Russia's Shadow Fleet with the help of drones. The Security Service of Ukraine, together with the Ukrainian Navy, struck in the Black Sea using Sea Baby maritime drones. The target was the tanker Dachshund. Under the flag of the Comoros Islands, the vessel sustained critical damage in the stern area. This was reported by Freedom's sources in the Security Service of Ukraine. According to preliminary data, the tanker, valued at around $30 million, has been put out of commission. It was heading toward Novorossiysk with its transponder turned off. The vessel is part of Russia's Shadow Fleet and is under sanctions from the EU, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and Switzerland. The Security Service of Ukraine notes that this is already. In 2 weeks, another sanctioned tanker has been put out of commission thanks to the strikes by Sea Baby, which significantly reduces the oil revenues of the Russian Federation.